Welcome, everybody. I'm just waiting for everyone to be kind of joining in because the numbers are rapidly going up, which is fantastic. And we'll start just in a few seconds. But you'll already see an amazing panel here, and it really is. We're so lucky to have everyone here, and I will go through in a minute each of them. So how we're going to be doing this is we're going to hear from everyone in the panel, and then we want your questions to come in thick and fast to help us with the discussion. You've got four people here who can really know their stuff on this, and we want you to kind of feel this is your opportunity to be able to get their opinion, but also we want to know what you're doing because there'll be about another 70 experts out there listening to us, and we want to hear from you as well. So it's a two-way thing. So I think, the numbers are still going up, but I'm going to start now. So I'm just going to make an introduction of myself. So I'm William Bird. I'm a GP by training, still practice as a GP in Reading. But I have always been interested in community, on physical activity, and then more recently engaging children. And I set up Intelligent Health to deliver something called Beat the Street. And the reason we put these webinars on is because we've reached 2 million people who've been engaged with Beat the Street in the UK, mostly England and Scotland. And of that, 1 million are children. So 1 million children have become engaged with the outdoors, with community groups, with their family, really importantly, and started to be outdoors and start to kind of use that outdoors. So we thought we'd celebrate. Our first webinar was about nature. That's something close to my heart as I worked for Natural England. And we had a panel that was amazing. We had Jade Saunders from DEFRA. We had Tim Smith from the Eden Project and Lost Gardens of Heligan, David Drake, Director of People at Natural England, and Dom Higgins, Head of Health and Wellbeing at the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts. And we went through, and I don't think there was any doubt at the end, is that if we don't reconnect people with nature, particularly children, we're going to be struggling with mental health and community cohesion for later on. So today, we're going to be going through very much as important a topic, and that is of children. I think there's no doubt that everyone listening here would realize we have got a problem with our younger generation, and time is slipping through our fingers to make this better. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give about 5 or 6 minutes about their personal story. And don't worry if it goes over a bit, because every story is really fascinating. But it's really about your personal story of when you kind of realized that there was a problem and then what you've done about it. And I think all the stories are amazing. And I think we'll then talk about, when we've finished that round, there'll be some questions, but then we're going to talk about what are we hearing from children, because that is a dimension missing. Obviously, we haven't got a child representative, but everyone here is listening to children every day. And then this is where we really want you to come in helping us understand what you're doing as listeners to the webinar, but also what you feel the solution needs to be. We'll go through there. So I'm going to, if that's okay, Paul, start with you. And I think the main thing that I'm so amazed by what you've been doing is that, yes, you started out as an entrepreneur, and you developed Ella's Kitchen, which has now grown to be I think it's the largest baby food group in the UK. But having done that, you didn't just stop there. You have now been asked by the mayor to do an obesity task force, and then by government, you've been setting up the Play Commission. Can you tell us your story about where you kind of shifted to really thinking something needs to be done, and then what you've done about it?
Thank you. Thank you, William. Thank you for bringing us all together and having an hour to be able to talk about such an important subject. So I've been working in, on, or around children's issues for 30 years now, and I think the seed of why I do what I do now and how I've learned what I've learned is really a combination of being an eternal optimist and an idealist, and being very happy to take 3 steps forwards and 2 steps back, and then another step forward and another step back, and slowly, slowly reach towards a better future. I think we can all improve, we can all do better. And I think the opportunity is in our young people and in our children, who are 20% of the population now and 100% of our future. So if we can get it right with them, we will have a better future. And that sort of overlapped with the fact that in my late 20s, I think I worked out that I'm just a big kid. I sort of think like a child internally. I wrote a book a few years later called Little Wins, which is all about the huge power of thinking like a toddler. But I think like a toddler. And when I looked for my first job with children, it was with Nickelodeon television channel. And as I was applying for that job, I got hugely inspired by something that was happening completely randomly at the same time. Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa. And in one of his first speeches, he explained how he thought that the soul of a country, the revelation of a country's soul was in the way it treats its children. He was going to put children's rights and children's welfare right at the heart of the South African government. It really inspired me, and I got that job and I started my career. And then about the same time, the Labour Party got elected in 1997 under a mandate of a youth policy, really. Education, education, education. They brought in Sure Start centres, they changed the youth justice system, they brought in child credit, and they, over the next 10 years, took 1 million children out of poverty. It was a real focus, and I thought, this is great. I'm building my career. I went on in 2004 to set up Ella's Kitchen, and that took off, and everything was going great until around 2010, when lots of things went into reverse and children came off the political agenda. And by accident or by design, a lot of things started to close and started to be less available to children who never had a political voice anyway, obviously, because they don't vote. But, you know, playgrounds closed, swimming pools closed, Sure Start centres closed. Fast food restaurants opened, more traffic was on the street, more no ball game signs were around, that sort of thing. And children's lives got a lot harder, and those 1 million kids, families went back into poverty. And then we had COVID at the end of that next decade. And, you know, children who were the least susceptible to the disease had the worst consequences from the policy and the implementation of what we tried to do when we locked down, and they couldn't do what children do, which is play and learn through play, and develop, and we're bearing the consequences of that now. So that's that kind of arc of my career. And right at the top of that arc is when I sold Ella's Kitchen, and I began to think, what comes next? And have tried to use entrepreneurship, whatever skills and nous I've got in that, in non-profit ways. So trying to help children's well-being, their welfare and their rights improve through taking entrepreneurial approaches to public policy, to education, to charity work, so that we can imagine the solutions and test them and build on them, listening and co-designing and sort of working with children all the way through. And two of the things that I've done, you've just mentioned in the last 10 years, to try and implement that was being asked by Sadiq Khan to look at what is causing 40% of London's children to be at an unhealthy weight. Why are they at the bottom of the league table for global cities in their health of their children, and what can be done about it? And then later, I'll talk about what we did there in a second, but later convening the Play Commission to represent to government ideas for, if it truly wants every child to thrive in this country and to break down the barriers to opportunity as this government has stated it does, what they need to do about that. In terms of the time and the spaces, the permissions, the rights that children have to play. So all of that came together really in a book that I wrote, published 3 years ago now, but I took 2 years writing it, called Raising the Nation, which is about how we can build a world where every one of our children thrives, because if they thrive, we'll all thrive. And what would happen differently if that was the purpose of a government? Let's make our children thrive. And out of that, obviously, children thrive when their energy in is good and their energy out is good. And I guess they're the two parts that I've been working on. The health of children around what they eat. Our task within the Child Obesity Task Force was to give a blueprint to create a transformation of London so that every child had every chance of eating healthily, of drinking plenty of water and taking plenty of physical activity. And without going into the details, we made 10 recommendations. I will share on the link the report that we made, which was called Every Child a Healthy Weight. And the mayor has taken many of those steps forward and started to reverse those statistics. But the thing that came through that, and you will see comes through the Play Commission, are three things that I think are absolutely key to help children have better lives. First of all, you've got to put children at the centre of whatever you're trying to do. Listen to them. If we're going to fix a problem, we've got to understand how children experience the environment and the world that they're growing up in. So it's not just lip service, it's really involving them in the understanding of the problem, the co-design of the solution, and in measuring and mapping how their lives change through what you're doing. Children at the center. Second thing is you've got to take a whole system approach to any of the complicated problems we've got in this world. By doing one thing is not going to change a complicated problem like overweight or a lack of play. It involves many different departments in government, many levels of government, many communities, and the solutions of sort of stitching together a solution with all of those parts. So taking a whole system approach and connecting actions that other people haven't connected. And then the third thing is to have a mindset that you can go bigger and bolder all the time. Celebrate small wins, work out how that can be expanded, how you can communicate to other communities that haven't found those small wins and build on them so that things get bolder and better. You set minimum standards, you test and learn things that aren't proven to prove them, and you just shout about the small steps you're taking forward with issues that seem hugely complex and overwhelming, and you've got to get momentum behind them. So those two things I've learned from both the task force and the Play Commission. And just finally, very briefly on the Play Commission, we reported to government after listening to countless experts in their work around play, but the real experts were children and their families, who we listened to all last year, visited hundreds of places, schools, hospitals, communities in the UK and beyond, and really landed on England needs a national play strategy and children need a right to play. They need the political will behind that to ensure that it happens. And we need a cultural change, drip feed a cultural change so that we all accept and promote the fact that children have equal right to any public space that the rest of us have, and that's not happening at the moment. So that's a whirlwind tour of things that I've done, but some of the things that I found. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Paul. And I love that. Children at the centre, whole systems approach, and have a mindset of bigger and better, which takes me on to Ingrid. So, Ingrid, that's kind of, I'm sure, three kind of sentiments, points there, which have kind of helped you go forward. And you've been putting children first. So, Ingrid, you're co-founder of Playing Out, which I'm hoping you're going to tell us more about children's play. And I think there's just a whole mass there of work that you've been doing with a very simple message, but hugely complex in trying to make it happen, which kind of comes across when we talk about, what are we going to do? You've kind of been there doing this grassroots level coming up, but actually making huge impact across the whole country. So could you tell us where it all started, Ingrid? Why did you feel so motivated to do something?
Yeah. Yeah, so the piece, I suppose, of children's health the piece of the jigsaw that I want to talk about is their freedom to play and to move and to socialize and to belong in the places where they live. And children have lost a huge amount in that sense. And the best way to illustrate it is really to go back, to a lot of our childhoods where, we played out, I played out every day. It was just a normal, natural part of everyday life in the 70s and 80s and before that. At weekends, holidays, all the time. And that freedom to play with other children close to where we lived on little patches of land, streets close by, gave us as children a huge amount. So it gave us, physical activity, running around, jumping, skipping, moving around, playing games, new physical skills. So we learnt maybe to ride a bike if we had access to a bike. We learnt ball skills, balancing, climbing, socialization. We learnt how to make friends, to fall out with other children and make up again. We learnt how to be resilient and to problem solve, to use our imaginations, and to become more and more independent in a way. We learnt to go further and further in our patch as our confidence grew. And we also learnt a sense of community. We knew the neighbours in our patch, that might have been saying hello, or it might have been being told off for making too much noise, but we knew them and we had a relationship with them. And through that, we also learnt a sense of belonging to where we lived. And all of that was really driven by a sense of enjoyment and also agency. So if we weren't enjoying things, we could change the game, or we could choose to go inside. So we had a lot of power as children in that situation. And the other thing to mention about it was completely free of cost. So it didn't matter where you lived, whether you had a car, whether you had money, whether you even had a parent around to supervise you in it. Most children could go out and play out with other children and access all of those benefits basically for free. So in a way, having access to space close to home was having access to health, to a lot of what was healthy for children. And then fast forward a lot of years to when I had small children, and it's actually much worse now. Our children weren't really playing out, and as parents we were much more kind of indoors, a bit more isolated, more restricted. And myself and a group of friends who kind of met at the primary school gate, we really felt the loss of this freedom for our children and also for us as parents. And we started to try and find ways to do something about it. And we tried lots of different things, kind of meeting up in the park all at the same time, asking our school to kind of take children out more. And eventually 2 of my friends and neighbours who live on the next street came up with the idea of closing their road as if for a street party for a few hours after school, but not doing anything, just temporarily closing it to through traffic and opening it up for play. And it was quite incredible what happened, because neighbours came out who'd never met before, children came out that they didn't actually know lived on the street, and they were children from the same school even. So it was a really it was a real eye-opening moment. And children played in all the ways that we all used to play. We just took things out from the hat that were in the house, might have been balls, scooter, a bit of chalk, nothing. There was no bouncy castle or anything. It was just whatever you took out from your house. And from that moment, the idea began to spread around Bristol. So other parents started to say, oh, we saw that thing you did on your road. How do you do it? We want to do it. We started to help other streets to do it, and we realised that it had tapped into something that a lot of parents felt and a lot of children wanted. And that's when we set up our organisation to try and help play streets grow, partly to give children back in very temporary ways some of this freedom that we'd valued so much, and that we had actual body memories of the kind of everything it gave us. But also because we're quite campaigning, and we believed maybe this could help change something, maybe this could help push something to be changed in bigger ways. And basically the way that Play Streets began was kind of looking around and realizing, why don't children have that same freedom that they used to have? And what we realized was it's actually the environment that has changed really over those decades. Children haven't changed. They still want the same things. Parents still want the same things. Traffic has more than doubled since the 1980s. Types of cars are different. The way people drive has changed. Streets aren't really seen as shared spaces anymore. They're seen very much as just for cars. And also, as Paul was mentioning, the environment has become much less friendly to children. It's even hostile in places. So no ball game signs that have sprung up everywhere on private estates, social housing estates over recent decades, but also a really strong complaints culture around children being out and making a noise. And we've seen that get much worse since COVID, where we have parents phoning us and saying, I've had complaints about my child being out because the noise of play. People can hear it when they're watching television. Or we've had schools get in touch saying they've received complaints saying, I'm trying to work from home, your break times are too loud. So we've kind of got to this place now after COVID and a lot of years after we began this work where children really almost aren't meant to be seen and heard really anymore. But back when we started this, we looked at these environmental issues, and it was before screens were really a massive lure for children. So screen time was kind of television or an hour on the computer or something. So it's very important to say that this was a problem before screens. For us, screens are more like a massive symptom of the fact that children can't go outside. They don't have that freedom. They don't have choices. And in a way, we don't want to be putting all the pressure onto they need to get off screens. We also need to be looking at what choices do they have, what freedoms do they have, what would they rather be doing. So that's kind of how Play Streets came about and what that was fueled by. The idea spread around the country, around the UK, and even internationally. And so over those kind of 13 years, we've supported many, many hundreds of streets and communities, on estates as well. And around 50,000 children have regularly played out more than they did before. And around 25,000 adults have helped to make all of that happen. And 100 local authorities have put policies in place to allow it, because it does need a specific policy putting in place to enable residents to take this action. So I suppose what we've seen through that movement is that children really want to be outside and to play. Parents really want this to happen, and Play Streets do enable it in a very temporary way. And there are many other temporary interventions and quick and low cost things that people can do. But actually, that's not enough for children. And it's only a certain amount of communities and neighbours who are going to have the energy and the confidence to take this action. We do work with community organisations as well that are in communities facing a lot of inequality and disadvantage, and we help through community organisations. They can help residents to close their road. But it's not the answer for children. You know, the answer for children is that somehow we can restore this freedom to be outside. We can make the outside world more welcoming and friendly and safer for children. And when we do that, as we've seen through Play Streets, life flows back out and children have access to things naturally that help with their health. So yeah, can talk more about any of that as we go along.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ingrid. And I think your enthusiasm always comes through. And, you know, it's extraordinary. 100 local authorities have now taken it. That shows us massive change has happened. Adrian, can I come to you? Because you have been working in the education sector more, primary
Yeah,
schools. Um, you're deputy chair, I think, of Wells Schools, and done a few books. You're a primary school
yeah,
teacher originally. And I love this. A happy hero. House of Lords, Lord Richard Layard, who's done so much on well-being, awarded you the
yeah,
happy hero. So can we hear more about what has been your journey through this? What
yeah.
problem did you see as a primary school teacher that led you to this path?
So it starts before I got into teaching. So for several years, I worked in the music industry, and in my late 20s, I went through a period of really poor mental health, went through a period of anxiety that led to a bout of depression. And as someone that is naturally optimistic, happy-go-lucky, that period really threw me. I'd never gone through anything like it before. Um, but supportive friends and family helped me through the worst of it. As I started to get better, I started to research causes of stress, anxiety, depression to understand more about what I was experiencing. And I discovered that as well as, a whole field of research in mental health, there was also what we might call a science of well-being. And I found that area of research and practical ideas so fascinating. And I started to make changes to my own life, which had like small things made a big difference. And one of the things it led me to was volunteering. I volunteered with this charity called Chance UK, and I mentored a 9-year-old boy in Hackney in East London for just over a year. And I found that experience so rewarding that it made me want to change careers. So in 2010, I retrained to become a primary school teacher. And there were two main goals. There was one, to help more children like the boy I was mentoring. So this was a boy that was at risk of being kicked out of mainstream school because of his behavior, but he had very challenging home life. And the other thing I wanted to do was to teach children the science of well-being, some of these practical tools that I'd learned as an adult that I simply wish I'd known growing up. It would have really benefited me, my friends, with just simple, normal life's challenges like moving from primary to secondary school, coping better in competitive sports, dealing with exam pressure, falling out with friends, all of these normal life experiences. So when I got into the classroom, it's very interesting that Paul mentioned earlier that 2010 was when a lot of the positive things that happened in, say, the 90s and before had started to go in reverse. That was the exact moment I started to get into teaching. And the challenges that, if I share some of the kind of the national picture, so according to the Good Childhood Report published by Children's Society, there's been a significant decrease in children's life satisfaction since 2009 till now. There's been a significant increase in children coping and dealing with mental health difficulties. So it was 1 in 9 children in 2017 that had a diagnosable mental health condition, significantly increased in the pandemic to 1 in 6, and now post-pandemic, it's about 1 in 5 children that has a probable mental health disorder. 53% currently of the UK's children are not active enough. They're not getting that minimum of 60 minutes activity a day. 20% of children post-pandemic are still persistently absent from school. They're simply not turning up. And in the Good Childhood Report, where they asked children about lots of different aspects of their life, school is the aspect of children's lives they are least satisfied and happy with. So those are the kind of the big issues that I was starting to kind of pick up on when I got into the classroom. And my approach was very much like you were saying, William, right at the beginning. It was kind of like, what can I do about this as just a classroom teacher when I started at an inner London primary school? And one of the things was to not wait for permission to change things, was just to start doing things that I knew would benefit the children. So when I first started off in London, I would bring in just physical activity breaks just to get children more physically active during the day because they were just sat down for such long periods. I started to introduce like mini kind of happiness lessons, just teaching them practical things that I'd learned as an adult, like I said, that I thought this might be really useful. And what I found was that those 5-10 minute segments of lessons were honestly the most engaged parts of my teaching day. There were so many rich questions from children. Children were going home, doing their own kind of reading and research and coming in and sharing bits from the science of happiness with me. And all of that led to, in 2018, I wrote a book called Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom. There's a little copy of it here. And basically, it is that. It's delving into the science of well-being and sharing simple, evidence-based, practical tools that we can improve children's well-being whilst they're in our care in primary and secondary schools. But because here's the thing, you mentioned Richard Layard earlier. This is his book, one of his books, The Origins of Happiness. And what's fascinating about that book is Richard Layard and colleagues from across Europe carried out research. It was a longitudinal study, and they were looking at adults scoring high levels of life satisfaction, and they had a whole load of information and data on these adults' lives, and they were able to look back at their childhood, and they wanted to be able to answer the question, what's the strongest predictor in childhood of adult life satisfaction? And they discovered that the strongest predictor was a child's emotional well-being. It was by far the strongest predictor. The weakest predictor, interestingly, was a child's intellectual development, essentially the grades they were getting. And this was particularly true at the age of 16. But then what they did, they included all the qualifications a person ever obtained in their life to see if that made a difference. As we become more qualified, does that improve our life satisfaction as we get older? And what they found was that a child's emotional well-being is significantly more important than all the qualifications a person ever obtains in their life in terms of predicting their future happiness as an adult. But probably more importantly, and this was what got me really excited, was the same piece of research found that schools, uh, and this was true of primary and secondary schools and teachers, schools have a major impact on children's well-being whilst they're at school. In fact, Richard Layard says schools matter as much as parents do. And so really my whole philosophy is schools, teachers, because children spend so much of their lives at school, like it is such a rich opportunity to, yes, we've always focused on academic attainment. How can we get them better at English, maths, science, everything else? But I think so many schools are wasting this rich opportunity to also positively impact children's well-being. And that is by far the strongest predictor. If we can influence that positively, we're setting them up to be happier adults. And so fast forward to where I am now, just to give an example of some of the things my current school, which is Broughton Community Schools in Aylesbury, are doing. So we teach 2 hours of good, high quality PE every week, and that's against a backdrop of PE hours in schools having declined by 11% over the last decade. So we're taking control of the things we can control, and we're giving children 2 hours of good quality PE. We've introduced the Daily Mile like many schools have, but it means outside of PE, every single day, children are being physically active. We have a really well-written, robust PSHE, personal, social, and health education curriculum. We've introduced a wellbeing curriculum. So we're teaching, like Paul was saying, we're teaching about good nutrition. We're teaching about sleep hygiene. We're teaching about how to develop positive, healthy relationships. We measure well-being of children. We use the Good Childhood Index so we can compare our children's well-being and their satisfaction with various aspects of their life with national data from the Good Childhood Report. And we know from our research that our children are significantly happier than the national average in terms of happiness with school, happiness with teachers, and happiness with schoolwork. And also, we've done a massive focus on play. Play makes up 20% of a child's time in school. So we've worked with an organisation called Outdoor Play and Learning, Opal. And so we've just, revised completely our playtime. So children are taught about managing risks. We allow children to climb trees in our playground. We allow them to engage in lots of different play, including rough and tumble. So it's a kind of change of philosophy in our school, and that's kind of what I've been trying to drive in the schools I've worked in. But obviously that's just me in a handful of schools. Fast forward to kind of now, I am on the advisory board of Wells Schools. Wells Schools is basically a movement. It's powered by the Youth Sport Trust, trying to connect schools like my school with other schools doing similar things. Because actually, there's lots of schools around the country, primary, secondary, special schools, pupil referral units, that are doing things differently. They are prioritizing the health and well-being of children and staff in order to improve learning, improve long-term well-being, etc. And then to encourage other schools that aren't doing what we're doing to join the movement, basically. And that's really the whole philosophy behind Wells Schools, is to make what we're doing the norm rather than the exception. But yeah, I can talk a bit more about Wells Schools a bit later as well if you need me to.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And I think that is, that research showing how emotional well-being of children is the most important thing. Probably doesn't surprise those on the panel, probably may surprise one or two of you listening in. Certainly massive surprise to the majority of the population, I think, who don't quite see this. We've got some questions coming up, but I want to hear from Sarah, because Sarah, you are in the heart of it all from a government point of view, DHSC and NHS England, in dealing with this incredibly difficult problem of secondary prevention, really, but also, the problem that you're seeing and how to deal with it of mental health for children. So tell us, I know you've been working in the government for 20 years now, mostly with children or children's services. So do let us know about that. But also, we're not going quite into solutions at the moment, but see where you see the massive problems that are occurring here, and in a way, what you're doing in government to try and help that. And then we can talk hopefully about how we can probably pull all this together in the last 20 minutes to be able to get some kind of solutions. And obviously the discussions will go on. So Sarah, please. and I will get you
Super.
spotted straight away.
Thank you. No, cheers, William. So, hi, really pleased to be able to join everybody today. So, I'm just thinking, going back almost 30 years now, I also trained as a primary school teacher, but had a very different experience, and decided not to continue in that for a range of different reasons. But I think I really saw a difference between what we were trying to do kind of academically and where children and young people were emotionally. And I felt like, my training at the time, having come out as a music graduate and then going on and doing a PGCE, I felt there was a real kind of disconnect between what I'd been prepared for in my kind of taught classes to what I was then seeing in the classroom. And I think that that's really informed a lot of the work that I've done over the years. I started working in local authority children's services in 2003, and it was right at the time of significant change in terms of the children's policy landscape. So we saw the publication of Every Child Matters, and that real whole system approach to thinking about how do we support children to live happy, fulfilled lives, live safely, thinking about everybody's responsibility in relation to child outcomes. And I think that ambition about taking a cross-sectoral approach to children and young people's well-being and development is something that's stayed with me throughout my career. I was really lucky to work for 16 years at Camden Council, and kind of latterly jointly working across the council and what was then the CCG, and for 8 years of that, doing children's mental health commissioning and working with an amazing range of providers who were really dedicated to improving children's lives. And that was both within the local authority, thinking about our children's services, but also our youth services, our play services, and also a really vibrant voluntary and community sector who were doing amazing work to support children and young people and working in really innovative ways. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in the work that we did at Camden was around the development of a young people's hub for 16 to 25-year-olds, an integrated holistic youth hub, the Hive, which was really bringing together a whole range of different support that was relevant to children and young people in that age range, and thinking about how we could get alongside them in the community and improve outcomes by working together rather than in our silos. And that's very much the philosophy that I've brought into the national programme. I've been here just over 7 years now. And I think we've seen significant progress in the way that we've been supporting children and young people. I mean, going back 10 years to Future in Mind back in 2015, set out that expectation on the system. But I think, as Adrian alluded to, so many challenges that children and young people have faced, that those headline stats that we've seen in the national surveys, the latest one being in 2023, that we know that there are a whole range of contributing factors to the mental ill health that children and young people are experiencing. Interestingly, just recently published report from the Young Futures Foundation and Manchester University, who did research around drivers of poor mental health in children and young people, and they came up with kind of 4 key drivers that they saw from the research that they pulled together, which was around sleep. It was around the precariousness of the jobs market, so kind of uncertain futures economically. It was also around social media, but interestingly, it was also around a reduction in the availability of the kind of safe, dedicated spaces, the sort of youth service spaces, play service spaces, where children and young people had the opportunity to engage in positive activities that were designed around their interests and their needs, working with trusted adults who they could build continuous relationships with, kind of consistent, ongoing, trusted relationships. And I think it's really powerful to hear that, you know, alongside what we've heard about, you know, the wider role, you know, in other settings, for example, in schools, about just how important that is in children and young people's lives. We've done a huge amount in the NHS to massively increase the range of services and support that are available to children and young people. And you know, can't talk about children's mental health without celebrating the fact that, you know, since the start of the long-term plan in 2019, we've had over a 60% increase in children and young people accessing NHS-funded mental health support. We're up to around about 850,000 in the last 12 months that access support, compared to just over 500,000 5 years ago. But that's against the backdrop of massively increasing need, rising prevalence of probable mental health disorders. So, you know, that 60% increase, that 850,000, still only equates to about 50% of children and young people who've got a probable mental health disorder who are able to access the support that they need. And we also know that there are massive challenges in terms of, you know, unwarranted variation in waiting times. When you look around the country, in too many areas, children and young people are waiting too long to access the support that they need, or accessing in crisis. We've seen lots of reports in terms of significant increases in children and young people. Thinking of the MAP study that was published last year. Massive increase in children and young people presenting to A&E settings in crisis. And I think, you know, as a system, we need to think differently about how we're supporting, how we're upstreaming more of our support, because I think there's a real tendency to focus on the acute end of the pathway, and we need to really look at how we can invert that to be able to provide more early intervention and more kind of secondary prevention in partnership with the kind of wider sector. I mean, I don't know whether this takes us too much onto the solutions, but I think I really welcome what we've seen in the 10-year plan published earlier this year, because it really places an emphasis on a whole societal approach to health. I think, you know, previous strategies that we've seen come from governments have been NHS strategies, and I think we do need to see the health of the nation, the health of children and young people as everybody's responsibility. So I think that sets a really positive ground for us. It also talks you know, very upfront in terms of the NHS needs to play more of a role in secondary prevention, that it hasn't perhaps seen secondary prevention as its primary focus, that it's been much more treatment focused, but that we need to do that in partnership with other agencies. And I think that the shifts that we see set out within that in terms of, you know, sickness to prevention. Secretary of State speaks regularly about, you know, the NHS having become a national sickness service rather than a national health service. So I think that, you know, that really sets the scene, and the shift towards community intervention. I've seen amazing examples around the country of services that are doing fantastic work around working with youth voluntary sector youth organisations, delivering in partnership, a real kind of democratisation of how we see the role of the NHS, not just as part of a kind of specialist treatment pathway, but they're at the front line, working in collaboration. And you know, I can't not mention the mental health support teams in schools, which have been rolled out over the last 5 or 6 years, getting up towards 60% coverage of pupils and learners. And that's over 1 million children and young people who are getting access to support through the mental health support teams in schools. But, you know, it's really clear with that kind of gap in need, you know, the 1.7 million children and young people with probable mental health needs, that we need to think differently about the way that we do things going forward.
Sarah, thank you so much. And that is a huge amount of work, I know. And I think it's going to come in. And perhaps one of the questions that we've been getting, I want you to all answer, is where the policy kind of really the big policy. But perhaps going to start with a question from Paul from Susan. She says, Paul, you talked about big systemic changes, but to start by celebrating the small wins, how do you effectively engage partners to bridge the gap between the two? So
Yes,
from those
thank you.
small wins to those big systemic changes. Now, if we can just keep all our answers fairly quick now, because there are a few questions to get through. I want to get through all of them, and there's some real big meaty ones as well coming up.
Yeah.
We'll sort the world out. So, Paul, how would you say with that? It's a brilliant question.
It is, and I don't think those two things are at the extremes that we all may initially think they are, because to create systemic change isn't necessarily about throwing big rocks into the pond and watching the chaos ensue or the change ensue. It could be throwing lots of small pebbles that create ripples, and those ripples together can create a wave. So small changes at many levels within a system. It's crucial that they're at many levels so the cumulative effect can grow. But the trick in engaging the stakeholders is to coordinate the changes that you're trying to make. Another part of the key is identifying which changes or what interventions are the ones that can create ripple effects, that can really shift the needle in of themselves. They can either create other things that can happen, or they can be scaled and changed. So even though that intervention might of itself be small. So what I'm sort of saying is that to change a whole system, you don't necessarily need massive things thrown in to change a piece of huge legislation or regulation or something. But to engage the stakeholders, any stakeholders for any change. When I ran a business through to running commissions and other organizations, I think you're trying to change the mindset of the people you're trying to engage who can shift the needle. And I use 3 Ps within that. You've got to get them initially to a place where they think change is possible. And that is by the smallest changes where you can create evidence to show that it's possible. It may be improbable, but it's possible and it's worth a go in a small scale to do a pilot to show what can happen. When you've got them into the mindset that they can do that, then there's an opportunity with small bits of evidence growing to show that it's probable that you can get change. It's not guaranteed, but it's probable and it's worth the risk. And, are you going to grab the moment? Or you want to be on the right side of history? All of that sort of stuff, constant communications and constant encouragement. And then to get them when things are probable and they press buttons, to know that what they're doing is powerful. It's systemic change. It's going to be a legacy. It's going to go beyond them in their position or them in their government. And I think there's a continuum of, it's crafted communications. It's using different tangents. It's helping them think that they're achieving what they want to do by achieving what you want to do underneath it. But it's taking a mindset from possible to probable to powerful. I think that's really critical and important. And if you think about it, we did that as children. All of our children are doing it now. Whenever we learn to walk, it's impossible to start with, yet we all, go through that process. And in the 500th time we try and toddle across the room, we do it because we've pieced everything together. And that's hugely powerful because it opens up the rest of our lives.
Thanks, Paul. That's brilliant. So it's a possible, probable, and powerful, the 3 Ps. I'm just going to ask one to Adrian actually, and Michelle, and I know this has been talked about and in many ways somehow dealt with as well, the UK Active and others, but she says, I'm really loving all of this. I always think school grounds are empty after school weekends and holidays. They're not being used. There's insurance problems. And yet there's a huge potential of play area which is not being used. Can you make a comment about how that is being addressed, if you know about it, or why it hasn't been addressed in the past? And then perhaps anyone else want to come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, as a pragmatist, there are difficulties, in terms of, like, say our school, we've got massive field, football pitch, playground, play structure, and yeah, in theory, on the weekend, our gates could be left open and kids could come and play. But the practicality is, that you can't just let anyone come into a school grounds and they could access parts of the building. So that is difficult. But at the same time, what schools can do, and our school does this, and this is a big part of what Wells schools typically do as well, is we have a huge range of extracurricular activities available to children after school. We've got photography clubs, we've got cookery clubs because we've got our own children's kitchen in our school. We have lots of sports, and those are all completely free for children to access. So it provides a couple of things. One, it provides parents with wraparound care, so they can sign their children up to these after school clubs, and so they get extra child care for free. They're not having to pay for these clubs. And secondly, it gives those children an opportunity to explore areas of learning that maybe aren't available in the national curriculum during the day, but they're fascinated by photography, or they really want to learn how to cook, ossobuco after school or whatever it is. And there is good research that shows when children engage in extracurricular activities, there's a correlational link. We can't say it causes this, but there's a correlational link, a strong link that shows that children that engage in extracurricular activities are more likely to do well in GCSEs and are more likely to be employed in young adulthood. So that's how we're using our kind of school facilities to provide lots of opportunities. We do breakfast clubs and we do lots of after school clubs for children at little or no cost, to make the most of our facilities, really.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks.
May I add a piece there,
Yes,
William?
of course, Paul.
I think language we use affects our culture, and the language we use is identifying a building that the public has paid for. We've all paid for, everybody on this call will have paid for a school building. We call it a school. But if we called it a community centre or a community asset or some other word that was for school at certain times of the day, certain parts of the year, but at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon might be a pharmacy for those same parents to collect prescriptions, or it might be a housing officer might be there, or doctors might be there, or we can use it for other public services. Or at the weekend, we could use it for other things, like a village hall or a town hall is used for different things. We'd have a different mindset about what that is, and we might set up different insurance and health and safety stuff around that. So, ultimately, those buildings are paid for by everybody, and we should all be able to have 24/7, ideally, or throughout the year anyway, access to those buildings. And I think if we change the language we use, we change the mindset we have of what those buildings are for.
I love that, Paul. And you're getting lots and lots of applause and celebrations and things. Ingrid, do you want to come in?
Yes, I was wondering, I absolutely understand the practical things you were saying, Adrian, and I was thinking about our movement and the appetite for parents to have spaces where children can play, whether it wouldn't have to be the school that opened the gates, let everyone in, organised it, turned up on a Saturday, because, it's space, as Paul is saying, it's public space, and actually maybe parents could facilitate that and open that up and run those sessions, because I think children, the root cause of everything is, why have we got some of the unhappiest children in the developed world? Like, to me, it's like all about the root thing of it. Why have we? And play is something, free play is something that's so fundamental to children. It's naturally and biologically how they move and socialize and learn and get around. And I think in the agencies that we've dealt with over the many years, there's a lot of things like, oh, how can we get children to be moving? We need to get them moving. We need to organize them and try and make them be more active, and all of these things. And actually, when children play, they just naturally, through enjoyment and their own drive, do a lot of these things. You can't actually keep them still if you've got a group of children together. So it's sort of how they can get more of this fundamentally important, biologically driven thing that they're actually just not getting enough of. And I think that sort of offer to children today is very much things organized by adults, and that's wonderful. Those things, everything you said is so amazing, and you think that gives so much to children. And they should have time where they're not being organized by adults. They're not being told what to do. They can't succeed or fail. They are just free to do all the things we did when we were children. And I think part of the solution has to be that we find ways for them to have that, because I think that is at the heart of that is partly what's at the heart of well-being and learning and so many other things. So it would be amazing if we could find ways to enable both, I guess, as a society.
Yeah, Ingrid, thank you. So that's been really good debate there, and I think it does. Two things came out. Adrian understanding the problems there, Paul saying actually these are community buildings, and we put names on it, and actually there's a huge. Once you get rid of that name, it becomes something much more obvious that it could be used. And then Ingrid, I think your point about actually children know what they're doing, and actually we adults stand back, let them express themselves as they can do. Now, I've got one big question here, and I want you to all be able to answer it in a minute. Um, and it's from Chris Wright from YST, and he says, what are the two or three big policy decisions that government could make? First of all, is it government that's going to make the decisions, or is it actually is it communities going to make decisions? So I think that's the first thing. We haven't got a luxury to do two or three. It's going to be one. And I'm afraid you're just going to have to pick one of many, many things. And I'm going to start with Sarah. So Sarah, from your angle, what could government do, which is not the communities, to make a difference on the future well-being that you'd be pushing for? And then if I can just quickly go around all of you, that'd be fantastic.
I mean, from my perspective, of course, what we don't do is dictate how local systems, how local communities should be organising themselves around the health system. So I think feel empowered. I think kind of that sense of get out of the way from a government perspective. Don't stand in. Don't get in the way of local systems being able to innovate and being able to feel that they can be bold. And I think from my perspective as a policy lead, a national policy lead, it's trying to think about how can I facilitate support and be able to create that kind of culture within the systems that I'm working with, so that people do feel empowered to be able to act upon what children and young people are telling them really matters.
Fantastic, Paul.
Okay, I'll go for a huge one, and that is incorporate into the law that a right to play for children, which in England, which Scotland and Wales have already done. The UK has broadly signed up to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which gives a right to play, interacted with lots of other rights. If we had that in law, the child has a right to play, that would flow down to our communities, to our local authorities. A place sufficiency duty would be imposed upon them, and children would have a right to the access to the time and the space and the permissions to play through that, and that's where we should start.
And Paul, just as a supplement on that, how close do you think we are to getting interest in government to make this happen?
Well, I'd hope that in England, the British government that is responsible for England would look to Scotland and Wales and see some of the evidence that's coming through there. I'd hope that they would trial and pilot some spaces. For example, Leeds Council voluntarily have a child-centred policy around everything that they do, and there's a lot to learn from them. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a slowly, we'll get there. I don't think it's going to happen in the next year, but there's strong evidence that, we should be doing that. Every child should have the same rights as everyone else has.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Ingrid, what would be your big policy?
I agree with Paul, and I think that would trickle down cross-departmentally to so many things to do with traffic speeds on residential roads, how housing is managed, how new homes are built. If we had that right to play, children's need and right to play and belong where they live, it would alter a lot of policies. And I suppose this is more of a kind of vision thing. I want to hear government actually speak to the problem we've got with children. We've got, deep problems of unhappiness and bad mental health and bad physical health. And to actually put that at the top of their agendas and say, we are going to change things for children, and this is how we're going to do it. And play would be absolutely central to that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And by the way, we've got some links there. So if we didn't have time very much to talk about what children are saying, because but there's a lot in the report, Paul, that you've got there and others. Adrian, can you give us that final big bang?
So one, it's actually a TomTom advert I share when I deliver kind of talks and training to teachers and school leaders, which is you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. So first and foremost, I think If we start to change, then the system starts to change. But secondly, in terms of policy, I would like to see a national measure of children's well-being in the country. I know Lord Richard Layard, Lord Gus O'Donnell are trying to push for that in the Children's Wellbeing Bill. And it's partly because of this belief that economists say this, we measure what we treasure. So we measure GDP, and so a lot of our policy focus goes on what can we do to boost GDP. And actually, if we measure children's well-being because we treasure it, we will start to change and do things in order to boost children's well-being. It also gives children a voice and a sense of agency to be asked, what is it about school you like? What don't you like? What changes would you like to see? And it also empowers parents. There's research from the Youth Sport Trust that shows that most parents choose a school based on where they think their child's going to be happiest. And if schools are, measuring well-being, they're placing well-being at the heart of their culture, their ethos, their curriculum. Parents can make informed choices about where they feel their child's going to be happiest and thrive the best. So yeah, national measure of children's well-being.
Thank you very much. Look, thank you all. An hour is such a short time to be able to go through this. This is only the beginning. Paul, you kind of started saying, in the Blair government, we had all that momentum going behind and it kind of got lost. You just hope we're now kind of seeing it back. And I know that the Play Commission did have a big impact, and everything that all of you are doing is having a massive impact. This is so, so important. I always love the kind of name of the organization in Toronto called 880, which delivers the way you build cities, and you build it for 8-year-olds and you build it for 80-year-olds. And if you get that right, you get it right for everyone. And I think that's what we're saying, putting this children first to wrap around everything about what a child needs, and everything else in society sorts itself out. Thank you so much. Paul, Ingrid, Sarah, Adrian, you've been fantastic. Thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be having another session, not on children, but we will be doing ones on more activity, and there's one on planning. Look forward to seeing you all. But again, thank you. And let's hope this conversation continues. I don't know. Well, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.